Hello and welcome to this Wednesday edition of the World Report with me, Arjun Samad Mahindra. Let's take a look at what's making headlines around the world. US President Donald Trump has renewed his demand for sweeping election reforms in the US, citing India's electoral system as an example of efficiency and integrity. Citing India and some other countries as examples, Trump said that US now fails to enforce basic and necessary election protections employed by modern, developed and even developing nations. He added, and I quote here, India and Brazil are tying, in fact, voter identification to a biometric database, while the US largely relies on self-attestation for citizenship. Chief advisor to the Bangladesh interim government, Professor Muhammad Yunus, departed for China for a 4-day visit by a special China Southwestern flight on Wednesday. Now, Yunus is leading a 57-member delegation, including foreign advisor Tauheed Hossain. Officials and security personnel accompany them. The visit marks the 50 years of diplomatic relations between Bangladesh and China. Wind-driven wildfires in South Korea killed at least 18 people and ravaged the country's southern regions. The fires destroyed more than 200 structures and forced 27,000 people, in fact, to evacuate, officials said on Wednesday. Meanwhile, houses, factories, vehicles and a 1,300-year-old Buddhist temple were among the structures destroyed in the wildfires that have, in fact, burned 43,330 acres and injured 19 people. The government's Emergency Response Center has underlined. Dry conditions, wind and trees down by Hurricane Helene fueled wildfires in North Carolina and South Carolina as well. Their evacuation orders were in effect Tuesday. Now, the National Weather Service of the U.S. issued a red flag warning for parts of South Carolina upstate, western North Carolina and northeast Georgia through Tuesday night. This as conditions were expected to be favorable for the rapid spread of wildfire, with lingering dry air and winds picking up to 10 to 20 meters per hour or around 16 to 32 kilometers per hour and gusting 25 to 35 meters per hour and 40 to 56 kilometers per hour. Meanwhile, 2 fires were burning in the mountains of South Carolina as well. U.S. House Democrats are demanding accountability over a mushrooming controversy that top national security officials, including Trump's defense secretary, texted plans for upcoming military strikes in Yemen to a group chat in a secure messaging app that included, in fact, the editor-in-chief for the Atlantic. Now, this was reported by the magazine Monday. The revelations were explored during a Senate Intelligence Committee hearing Tuesday that, in fact, examined worldwide threats to the U.S. homeland. The text chain contained operational details of forthcoming strikes on Iran-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen, including information about targets, weapons, and the U.S. would be deploying and, in fact, attacking sequence as well. Journalist Jeffrey Goldberg reported these revelations. He's the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic. For perspective, now the strikes began just 2 hours after Goldberg received the details on the messaging platform group he was a part of.
Let's just debunk a few myths here, because now the approach these leaders are taking is to lie. That's not in the leadership manual for our armed services, but that's what they're doing now. They're saying, oh, this information wasn't classified. Without even knowing the full details, we know that the time of attack for this operation was in the message. Let's be clear. That's classified information. That's all you need to know. Let's address another issue. Was this illegal? It's illegal on 2 different levels. One, it's mishandling classified information. That's been well established. But the second level it's illegal on is that the executive is required to maintain records of its communications. And this is a way for this lawless administration to get around that.
Staying with the controversy, US President Donald Trump has said that he stands by his national security advisor, Michael Waltz, who accidentally invited the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic magazine to a highly sensitive chat among senior administration officials on the messaging app Signal. Now, this was about a forthcoming US military operation. The US president called criticism against Waltz unfair and even bashed Goldberg and his magazine for being bad for the country. By the way, Trump also brushed aside questions about if someone would be fired for their mistake. Listen into what Trump said, followed by Tulsi Gabbard's remarks, who claims that there in fact was no classified material that was shared in that Signal chat.
This certainly will look at this, but the main thing was nothing happened. The attack was totally successful. It was, I guess, from what I understand, took place during, and it wasn't classified information. So this was not classified. Now, if it's classified information, it's probably a little bit different. But I always say you have to learn from every experience. I think it was very unfair the way they attacked Michael. He's a good person.
There was no classified material that was shared in that.
So then, if there was no classified material, share it with the committee. You can't have it both ways. These are important jobs. This is our national security. Bobbing and weaving and trying to, filibuster your answer. So please answer the question. If this was Director Gabbard, if this was a rank and file intelligence officer who did this kind of careless behavior, what would you do with them?
Senator, I'll reiterate that there was no classified material that was shared in that.
And if there's no classified materials, share. And then if there's no classified materials, then you can't even answer the question whether you're on the chat. This is strangely familiar, and I think my colleagues will remember, when you couldn't answer the question, is Edward Snowden a traitor? Man, I have serious doubts about anyway.
Russia and Ukraine agreed to a ceasefire in the Black Sea following talks with the US in Saudi Arabia's capital, Riyadh. It's unclear when the truce would take effect, as the Kremlin stressed on certain conditions now to be met. Now, these include lifting sanctions on Russia's agricultural bank and other institutions. Such an agreement would in fact mark the first step towards unwinding sanctions on Russia since the Ukraine war began in February 2022. The Black Sea is one theater in which Ukrainian forces have put Russia on the defensive, perhaps making Moscow keener to seek a truce there. Meanwhile, some experts argue that the Russian art of the deal is selling Russian demands as Russian concessions to the Americans and then demand sanctions relief on top.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says it is too soon to tell whether these ceasefire proposals will ultimately work, but he says it is at least a step in the right direction. He says that there could be a maritime ceasefire, essentially in principle. He also said that during the Saudi Arabia talks between Ukrainian and US delegations, they discussed a potential halt to attacks on critical infrastructure and energy sites. Zelensky says that we will now see how that could be implemented. We've also heard from Ukraine's defense minister, Rustem Umerov. Now, he says that what is crucial now is for technical talks to resume as soon as possible to discuss things like how these agreements could be implemented, how they could be monitored.
Moscow said Tuesday it had agreed to a Black Sea security deal if sanctions against its food and fertilizer exports are lifted. Following US-Russia talks in Saudi Arabia, the Kremlin released a statement saying the sides agreed to ensure the implementation of the Black Sea Initiative, which includes navigation safety guarantees in the Black Sea and the prevention of the use of commercial vessels for military purposes. It also agreed to allow the inspection of those vessels. But all that only after a series of conditions were met, including the lifting of restrictions and sanctions on a major agricultural bank, on food and fertilizer exporters, and on Russian vessels. The statement also says Washington will help restore Russia's access to the world market of agriculture and fertilizer exports, lower maritime insurance costs, and enhanced access to ports and payment systems for such transactions. In addition, Moscow says that Russia and the United States will work on the development of measures to hold strikes on Russian and Ukrainian energy facilities for 30 days.
India and China held diplomatic talks in Beijing on Tuesday in what the Ministry of External Affairs describes as a positive and constructive atmosphere. The meeting was part of ongoing efforts to manage broader issues between the two countries. The 33rd meeting of the Working Mechanism for Consultation and Coordination on India-China Border Affairs was held in Beijing. The meeting was part of efforts by the two sides to normalize bilateral relations. India, meanwhile, maintained its stance and underlined that peace and tranquility on border is critical for smooth bilateral relations. It also added that the early resumption, in fact, of cross-border cooperation and the Kailash Mansarovar Yatra was also important. Fugitive diamond trader Mehul Choksi, one of India's most wanted in connection with the Punjab National Bank loan fraud case, is currently in Belgium. The European nation has confirmed to NDTV. In a communication, the Belgian Foreign Ministry confirmed that they are aware of Choksi's presence and they attach great importance to it and attention to it. Belgium, however, said they do not comment on individual cases. Even so, the FPS Foreign Affairs continues to closely follow the developments in this important case. Indian authorities, meanwhile, have contacted their Belgian counterparts to start the process of Mr. Choksi's extradition. And mass protests erupted across Nepal as demonstrators took to the streets demanding the reinstatement of the Nepal Electricity Authority chief. The situation escalated in the evening when the All Nepal National Independent Students Union burned an effigy of Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli in response to Gheesing's sudden removal. US Intel Chief Tulsi Gabbard has told senators that Tehran is not building a nuclear weapon and that Supreme Leader Khamenei has not yet authorized the nuclear weapons program that he suspended in 2003. However, Gabbard added Iran's enriched uranium stockpile is at its highest levels and is unprecedented for a state without nuclear weapons. Now, the report said that Iran is likely continuing work on chemical and biological agents for military use, with Tehran regime scientists showing special interest in chemicals that have a wide range of sedation, dislocation, and amnestic incapacitating effect, and can also, in fact, be lethal. Anti-government protesters in Turkey say they have planned to keep up a campaign of demonstrations triggered by the jailing of Istanbul's mayor, the biggest such opposition action in a decade. Now, this despite mass arrests and clashes with Erdogan's police force. US Vice President J.D. Vance said on Tuesday that he will visit Greenland this week, accompanying a high-profile US delegation to the territory that US President Donald Trump says Washington should in fact take over.
Yes, the J.D. Vance is allowed to visit Biduvik Space Base. What is controversial here is all about the timing. Greenland and Denmark have stated very clearly that they don't want the US to visit right now when Greenland doesn't have a government in place. So it's all about timing. From Greenland's side, also from Denmark's side, it's more seen as an kind of intimidation. So it's an unpleasant surprise that we now see J.D. Vance also announcing his visit to Greenland. There's an agreement from 1951 between Denmark and the US about defense of Greenland, which has since been updated. So Greenland is also a part of it now. And to make a long story short, it gives US the right to use the Biduvik Space Base and visit it whenever they want. So that's not controversial. What is controversial here is the timing. I hope that if or when he's going to visit Biduvik Space Base and gonna be briefed on the security situation, that they will tell them that there's not an immediate threat to Greenland, as he claims in his post on X.